Hey everybody, welcome to Cinema Trip Reviews. Today on the show, I'm talking about Banshees of Inisherin. Welcome to Cinema Trip Reviews, everybody. I am Wyatt, and today on the show, I'm talking about Banshees of Inisherin. If you're new to the channel, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Cinema Trip Reviews. Also, wherever you get your podcasts, pretty much available everywhere, so drop in and leave us a good review there. Today on the show, like I mentioned 3 times previously, I'm talking about Banshees of Inisherin. This movie released in October. This movie is kind of just hitting my radar. I have been seeing a lot more of it recently due to all the Oscar buzz and everything. And, I'm not very big on, award season and the Oscars, everything. I, of course, hear about, some of the controversy or any of the news stories the next day. But I'm not usually tuning in. I really don't care about award season. But this movie was up for a ton of awards, and I have been hearing a lot about it. So I was just kind of perusing through HBO Max and saw that this was on there. It has Colin Farrell. It has Brendan Gleeson in it. So I was like, you know what? Hell, with all the, buzz that's surrounding it, I'm going to give it a good old watch. For those who watched last week's video, you're expecting a Kill Bill Volume 1 review this week. Due to some scheduling conflicts, got to push that to next week. So next week we will be reviewing Kill Bill Volume 1. This week, I decided to kind of just look around, find a review, and this one dropped right on my lap. And I'm glad it did because just kind of starting off the review, I really dug this movie. I totally get a lot of the buzz around it. This movie was kind of marketed a little differently because I went back and watched some of the trailers before I actually watched the movie to kind of get an idea of what it was before I saw it. I feel like the trailers kind of market it as like a dark comedy sort of thing, but when you really watch the movie, it turns out to be very bleak and depressing. There is a little bit of comedy here and there throughout of it. Not too much, but this movie is definitely a drama at its core. Now, for those who don't know much about this movie, the basic premise is Podrick, played by Colin Farrell. He is best friends with Calm, who's played by Brendan Gleeson. You don't really get to see much of this friendship at the beginning of this movie. It just kind of starts and goes right into the main plot, which is the plot of the story is these two best friends. Brendan Gleeson's character, all of a sudden, out of the blue one day, just doesn't want anything to do with Colin Farrell's character, Podrick. Doesn't want anything to do with him. Doesn't want to be friends with him anymore. He's over it. Doesn't want him talking to him or anything like that. Colin Farrell's character, Podrick, as you find out through the course of this movie, he's kind of dull. There's not much to him. He's a farmer. This movie is set in the backdrop of like 1923 during the Irish Civil War. I don't know much about the Irish Civil War, mind you, so I'm not going to go into details regarding that. But with this movie kind of set there, it's very limited about what some of these characters can do. There's no TV or anything like that. There's no phones. So, when you're talking about someone who's dull in this time period, he's a farmer. There's really not much else to him. He's not like Brendan Gleeson's character, who's a musician. He likes to write music. He likes to play music with other musicians. Colin Farrell's character really doesn't do much other than farm, hang out with his sister, who he lives with, and go to the pub every day and kind of chat with the pub people. But he's not really an interesting person. And that's really what's behind Brendan Gleeson's character. Over all these years, Brendan Gleeson feels like he hasn't been doing anything with his life. He feels like he wants to have an impact going forward after he dies. So he really wants to dedicate himself to his music and start writing. He wants to leave something behind so people can know his name years and years after he passes, where he feels like he's been wasting all of his time just talking with Colin Farrell's character, who he's not really getting much from. It's just random conversation about random things. He's not getting anything out of it. So instead of wasting his time talking to a dullard, he wants to kind of put forth with his music and try to do something with his life. Well, Colin Farrell's character, Podrick, does not get this through his head at all. And you really feel bad for this dude through the whole course of this movie, just because he just doesn't understand. And even when Brendan Gleeson tries to explain it to him a little bit, I feel he just doesn't want to understand. Looking at it from his point of view, he's losing his best friend all of a sudden. His best friend just all of a sudden just doesn't want anything to do with him. He's over him. He doesn't want to be friends. You're going to take that really hard. And I feel like the movie kind of wants you to sympathize with Brandon Gleeson's character, but over the course of the movie, you really sympathize and feel bad for Podrick, Colin Farrell's character, just because like you put yourself in his shoes. Like, man, you don't have anything else to fill your time other than just hanging out with your sister or at the bar, and your one and only best friend just doesn't want anything to do with you out of the blue anymore. You really feel bad for him, and not just him losing his best friend, but through the course of this movie, he just goes through so much stuff. He starts losing everything, and you really, really feel bad for this guy. And now I will go into some spoilers throughout the review here, but I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for this, because we're not done yet. We're not done yet, because Colin Farrell's character can just not get this through his head and just wants to keep talking with him. And Brandon Gleeson characters will go outside to drink his beer, will stay in his house, lock himself in his house, avoiding Colin Farrell. Because he can't get this through his head, Brendan Gleeson's character, Calm, tells him, if you keep bothering me, every single time that you come and talk to me, I'm going to cut a finger off. And if you come and talk to me again after that, I'll cut another finger off. And I'm not just going to cut them off. I'm going to throw these fingers at your doorstep so you can keep them to remember me. And you can remember not to come and talk to me and not to bother me. It seems it seems so silly on the surface. And of course it's a movie, it's going to be silly. But I feel like the message behind it is like, dude, if you really care about me, if you care about me at all, and you know me, and you know how much I love my music and how much I want to dedicate myself to the music because he plays like the violin or the fiddle or whatever it is. You know how much this means to me and how much I love music. Anytime you come talk to me, I'm going to take a piece of myself that stops me from, accomplishing my dream of writing music. Every finger that he takes is just another way of playing the violin or fiddle. So, I mean, he goes, talks to him 5 times, 6 times. He's not going to play that fiddle anymore. So it really sets up a chain of events that you're like, wow, the stakes are pretty high here. This dude's could lose everything that holds dear to him. And there's really a lot of depth to this, because you look at it from Colin Farrell's side where it's like, okay, he's losing his best friend. All he has is his sister and this pub. But on Brendan Gleeson's side, he really doesn't have much himself. He doesn't have a family. He goes to the pub as well, and he only has his dog. I mean, Colin Farrell has his animals because he's a farmer, but he only really has his dog as well. But he seems like he's kind of going through a depression or a midlife crisis. When he talks to the priest at one point, I mean, he confesses about certain things. So, I mean, there's a lot of depth to this character as well, but for the majority of the movie, you really only follow Colin Farrell. You follow Podrick. There's really only 4 main characters in this movie. You get Podrick and Calm, who I've talked about so far. But then you get Podrick's sister, played by Carrie Condon, and she's fantastic in this movie as well. And Barry Keoghan, who is what's known in the movie as like pretty much the village dimwit in a way. And throughout the movie, you kind of get a sense that there is something there beneath the surface, but he is so beaten down by everything around him. I mean, you have the war happening pretty much right across the river. Throughout the movie, there's times where they're just kind of walking by and you hear like gunshots and explosions, and then they'll kind of talk about it in certain scenes. But Barry Keoghan's character, Dominic, he's being beaten down by everything. There's the war going on. The whole village and island thinks he's just a dimwit. They don't think nothing of him. They joke about smacking him around, and he's banned from the bars for doing certain things. He's not very good at socializing with people. He doesn't have much self-awareness, really. And he likes girls. He likes trying to talk to girls, but he doesn't have much success with them. He goes home to a father that is a piece of shit, like huge piece of shit. And he's a cop in this town, and he causes some trouble throughout the movie. But he's an abuser among worse things that you find out. But he has to go home to that. They make him out to be this dimwit, but there's certain parts throughout this movie where he'll say something, and you're like, man, there's really something beneath the surface with his character. And there's, man, just the one scene that you get kind of towards the end of the movie where he goes and talks to Carrie Condon's character, and he finally gets the courage to ask her out and everything, and she just lets him down in the most, easy possible way. And you can tell it just breaks his heart, and he's just not very good socially, so he's very awkward. And just the way that he plays it, and I haven't seen a lot of his Barry Keoghan's movies. He does that character great. Just kind of the socially awkward character. He plays that fantastic. And he was great in this movie. And there's a reason that damn near every one of these characters were up for an Oscar. I mean, Barry Keoghan, Carrie Condon, and Brendan Gleeson were up for Best Supporting Actor and Actress in this movie. Colin Farrell was up for Best Actor. This movie was up for a ton of different awards for a good reason. I mean, the performances in this are fantastic. But a little bit of spoilers here throughout the movie. Carrie Condon, you can tell, I mean, all she has in this world, just like the rest of these characters, have only a couple things. She really only has her brother who she lives with in this house. She doesn't really, and she talks with this old crone who's like a witch. She reminds me of the witch from like Resident Evil Village, but she shows up and she just always predicts death, and there's just nothing good comes from this woman. And you see her multiple times throughout this movie. Carrie Condon's character doesn't have really anything in this film until she gets a letter about a job opportunity in the city. So she has an opportunity to leave this island and she ends up taking it. So Podrick in this movie, among dealing with losing his best friend and, finding out that he's dull and he's worried about everybody else's, impression of him, he's going to lose his sister on top of this. She's leaving and he's going to be all alone in this house. And like I mentioned, there's some comedy in this movie, but as it goes on, it gets bleaker and bleaker and bleaker and even more depressing, especially for Podrick. And I mean, he loses damn near everything, and that's not even the worst of it. You think, I mean, it's sad at this point, but as the movie goes on and he's going through this with Brendan Gleeson, it gets to a point where you find out the only time that Podrick is interesting is whenever he drinks. And there's a couple points in this movie where he drinks pretty heavily, he gets drunk, and he confronts him. And one point when he confronts him in the bar, even Calm's like, that's the most interesting he has ever been ever. I actually kind of like him again. And that gets back to him, so he decides to confront him again, being drunk. And he got away with it the first time without any repercussions. But this time when he confronts him again, Calm's like, all right, you did it this time. So he chops off the rest of his fingers on his hand. He cannot play fiddle anymore. He throws him at his doorstep when Podrick isn't even home, where his pet donkey Jenny, who's been following around this whole movie, ends up eating them and choking on him and dies. So at this point, he loses his best friend who doesn't want anything to do with him or talk to him. His sister has left the island. She is gone. She's gone for a job. He doesn't get to see her anymore. And now one of his best friends, his animals, his pet, is dead. So he literally has nothing else in this world at this point. That was the last straw. This broke Podrick. So he decides to go out on all-out war with Calm. And he goes and even tells him, like, this is it. You killed my donkey. You killed my last friend. This feud between us now is not going to stop until one of us is dead. And he even tells him, tomorrow at 2:00, I'm going to burn your house down, whether you're in it or not. And you can try to stop me, but it's happening. And sure enough, he does it. And Brendan Gleeson, he's at that point where he's just like, you know what? I cut all my fingers off. I can't play music. He's going to give up. He's going to give himself up. And he's just sitting in that shack while he's letting it happen. And he even takes his dog. He doesn't want his dog to die, so he takes Brendan Gleeson's dog with him, takes care of him, comes back the next day, and Brendan Gleeson saves himself. He throws the chair out the window, and he rescues himself. And they just have that little moment on the beach, and he returns his dog to him and everything, and he has that moment where he's like, all right, are we straight now? I'm very sorry. I didn't mean anything about killing your donkey. Are we square now? He's like, we would have been square if you would have stayed in that house, because we're only square until we're both dead. And he's like, and that's it. And I feel like you get that moment where everything kind of flips. It flip-flops in that very moment where Podrick, Colin Farrell, he's the one that just doesn't want anything to do with him. And at this moment, Colm finally has an interest in Podrick. He is the most interesting guy to him now, and he finally sees something in him that maybe he didn't before. And the roles kind of reversed, and now Podrick doesn't want anything to do with him. It has a lot in common with the civil war that you have going on in the background. Now, I don't know a lot, or very much at all, about the Irish Civil War. But as they talk about it through the movie, you have a civil war between these two guys on this island, and you have kind of a needless casualty of war throughout the movie, because during the movie you have that crone or witch that predicts that there's going to be a death or two by the end. Not by the end of the film, they didn't break the third wall or anything, but by all said and done, there's going to be a death or two. And kind of throughout the rest of the movie, you think it's going to be one of these guys. And I mean, with Colin Farrell burning down his house, you think that Colm is going to die. Or with everything that's happening to Podrick, you think maybe he could possibly kill himself at a certain point. But no, it kind of throws in a different death, which is, spoiler, this is Barry Keoghan's character, Dominic, who ends up just falling into the river and he drowns. It really comes by a surprise, because he was walking by the river in that scene I mentioned where he's talking with Carrie Condon's character, but after that, you don't really see him again. So he dies off screen. You don't get to see it at all. It's kind of a pointless death, but when you look at it big picture with the Civil War in the background and with the Civil War of these guys, and the last scene, one of the last scenes that you get with him, he's sitting there drinking with Podrick, and Podrick is the nice guy. He even says it. I'm the nice guy. I get walked all over all the time and everything. And he finally stands up for himself at certain points, and then he really does something mean, which is pushing away a character that was getting close to Brendan Gleeson's character. He purposely pushes him away so he doesn't have a friend. And he tells Dominic about this, and that really saddens him because, like I mentioned before, he's going through it. He hates being home because his dad's a piece of shit. Everybody in town thinks he's a nitwit, doesn't really want anything to do with him, thinks he's stupid. And then you have the war and everything on the outside. So the one only bright spot in his life, which is Podrick, he finds out he's not as nice or the person he really is cracked up to be. So his world's kind of shaken at that point. And maybe that's why. Maybe he committed suicide, possibly. You don't really find out. I mean, there's a lot of factors that could have went into him killing himself. If he even did kill himself, maybe it was an accident. I don't know. It just kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm not sure if it was really needed in this case. I feel like Dominic's death didn't really impact the story between Podrick and Colm for me. It didn't. So, I mean, I love the performance of Barry Keoghan. I understand this is a drama. You want some terrible things to happen, some depressing things to happen, and to throw another death in there. That makes sense. But to me, it didn't really make a difference on the impact of the story between the two characters you're following and for a majority of this movie. I think him while he's alive impacted him just by talking with him and some of the interactions they have throughout the movie. But his death really didn't impact it other than just make it another depressing thing where Podrick loses another friend, which that doesn't really seem like the most important thing to him is his death, which is weird because, I mean, he's losing everything else. He lost his best friend and he lost his sister and he lost his other best friend, his donkey Jenny. Those are kind of overshadowing Dominic's death. So I feel like his death wasn't really needed, but having him alive through the rest of the movie, I'm not sure what he would have done as well. So they could have went either way with it. His death just didn't really do anything for me. Now, this movie does do a great job of averting your expectations because as I was watching it, I kind of was under the assumption that Podrick was going to find a way to coexist with Brendan Gleeson's character in this. I thought he was going to kind of find a way, like a little loophole of kind of hanging out with him. And one of the things I thought he was going to do was actually go along with not talking to him anymore, but actually hanging out with him. He was going to find a way to become his best friend without socializing to him. Just kind of going to his house, listening to him play music, going to the bar, having some beers together. But they're not going to be socializing. They can have that friendship of just hanging out without talking. I thought that was going to be an interesting way to end the movie, of finding a way to coexist without socializing, without being boring. But they did go another way with it. There was a couple of different ways I expected this to kind of pan out. They went a completely different way with this movie, which is good. I didn't mind the way that they actually went with the movie. because it actually made sense in a point, and it kind of left it open-ended as well. You don't know what's going to happen after that. You know they're going to have that feud, but there's really no closure to it. They've been through so much shit, but at the end of the movie, like I mentioned, the roles reversed a little bit. So who knows what happens after the movie? Maybe Brendan Gleeson's character wants to socialize with him, and then Colin Farrell just doesn't want anything to do with him anymore. Maybe that's the way that goes after. But I think leaving it open-ended like that helps the story a little bit. And I feel like having them both alive and knowing that feud's going on helps too, because if this movie ended with one of them dying, say Podrick, Colin Farrell's character, maybe he does kill Brendan Gleeson in that fire that he sets to his house. And then maybe that happens and he feels tremendous guilt from it. And then he's like, shit, I killed my best friend and I don't have him any longer. That would have been even more depressing than what happens in the real ending of the movie. So I don't know. I think there's a couple different ways they could have went with it. A couple of those would have been the expected ending, but the director of this movie, Martin McDonagh, he was up for, best picture and best directing in this for a reason. He did a great job with this, and I believe he wrote it as well. So the way he went with averting expectations and kind of zigging when you expect him to zag, that's what works about great movies. And as long as it makes sense in the broader scheme or for an ending or for the rest of the movie, as long as it makes sense and it fits, it's going to work, man. Because, there's a lot of movies out there that they advert your expectations purposely and it just goes in a weird direction that doesn't make sense at all. And it absolutely hurts the movie tremendously. Whereas these, I feel like a lot of the ways that he adverts your expectations and kind of takes in a different direction, it helps the movie in a sense, especially the ending where the roles are reversed, like I mentioned. But on top of Martin McDonagh doing a great job directing, the music in this is fantastic as well. Now, being set in kind of like Ireland or North Ireland, they went away from doing traditional Irish music. And from what I read, the director specifically didn't want traditional Irish music in this. He wanted something different. And I think the direction they went with it was fantastic. There's a lot of like kind of cheery, like kind of a lighter music in the beginning. But as the movie goes on, the music evolves and it kind of goes into a darker, ominous type music tone throughout the rest of it. Whoever made the music on this did a fantastic job with this, because I definitely took notice as the movie was going, because the music in it does a great job of impacting some of the major moments in this movie, whether it's some of a couple more shocking moments or if it's a lot of more depressing, bleaker moments in the movie. It really hits home with that music, that score that's behind it. So shout out to who composed the music in this. They did a fantastic job. But overall, the hype for this movie was definitely deserved, I feel. I had a great time watching it. I had a great time trying to figure out where it was going to go next, and it just kept averting my expectations. So I was kind of second guessing myself every time I had a new theory on what was going to happen. And I really wasn't expecting that out of this movie. I was, like I mentioned, I was expecting kind of a dark comedy. It definitely took it in a different direction. It was definitely a lot more darker than I expected it to be. It wasn't a tear shedder for me at all. It was close with the death of that donkey. It was very close, but I didn't shed a tear at this one. But there's definitely a reason it was up for so many awards, is because they just did a great job all around with this. The writing was tight, the directing was great, the acting was fantastic by everybody all around. Even the side characters in the movie, they did a fantastic job. Now, out of like a buy it, rent it, or miss it type of thing, as much as I'm praising it and as much as I enjoyed the movie, I'm not going to go out and buy it. This is probably not one I'm going to add to my collection, because this is one I'm not going to go back and rewatch a lot. I wouldn't think. But I would definitely say rent this movie. It is on HBO Max, like I mentioned. So if you have HBO Max, definitely check out this movie. You definitely put it in your must-watch collection there. I highly recommend this movie, because this movie really wasn't on my radar until I started seeing a little bit more about it. And you know what? I'm going to give it a chance. And sometimes those movies you give a chance, they end up surprising you. And this one certainly surprised me. And I am a big Colin Farrell fan. I have liked pretty much everything Brendan Gleeson is in that I have seen. So, two great actors in this movie coming out, and they did a fantastic job. Colin Farrell owns the movie. There was a reason he was up for Best Actor. But with Everything Everywhere All at Once, being nominated for damn near everything and winning everything. I mean, that movie is fantastic in its own right, and it deserved damn near every single award that it won. So I'm not going to take anything away from that one, but there's a reason this one was up for so many awards. And there's definitely an argument that maybe they should have won a couple of them, but it's hard to take anything away from Everything Everywhere All at Once. That movie is a masterpiece. It is fantastic. But that is my kind of long-winded review of the Banshees of Inisherin. I highly recommend it. I really had a great time watching this one, even though it is kind of dark and depressing. It's such a great movie. I definitely recommend this one. But next week on the show, Alex is joining me to talk about Kill Bill Volume 1 for its 20th anniversary, diving into that Quentin Tarantino universe once again like we did before, talking about Death Proof. If you haven't seen that review, go check that one out. It's a pretty good time. We are just covering Volume 1, not Volume 2, because we don't need a 2 or 3 hour review. We decided to split those up a little bit, just like Quentin Tarantino did. But we are going to be covering that next week. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Cinema Trip Reviews. Go check us out wherever you get your podcasts. We're pretty much available everywhere. Drop in and leave us a good review there. And we'll see everybody next week.